the rise of the gods in the vast reaches of the galaxy, there existed a race of beings that called themselves the Eternals. They were unlike anything humanity had ever imagined immortal, godlike entities who had risen to dominate the stars. For thousands of years, they ruled over countless civilizations, their power unmatched by any other force in the universe. They saw themselves as the supreme beings, the true gods of the galaxy. No one dared challenge them, for no one could. The Eternals were the most advanced species to ever exist. Their ships could travel faster than light. Their weapons could obliterate entire planets, and their technology was far beyond anything Earth had ever dreamed of. Their empire stretched across dozens of galaxies, with each world bowing to their might. The Eternals' rule was absolute. To them, the galaxy was their domain, and anyone who dared to oppose them was swiftly crushed. For centuries, no one questioned their power. The Eternals were invincible, their authority absolute. They believed that their reign would last forever, with no force in the universe able to topple them. The beings they ruled over feared them, worshipped them, and bowed to their will. To the Eternals, they were gods, and their place at the top of the galaxy was guaranteed. But there was one thing the Eternals had failed to notice: small, insignificant planet in the farthest reaches of the galaxy. This planet, known as Earth, had always been left alone by the Eternals. It was a primitive world, far from the grand civilizations they had conquered. Earth was not on the Eternals' radar, and the humans who lived there were just another species. To be ignored, however, as the Eternals continued their endless expansion, Earth began to develop. Over the centuries, humans grew more advanced. Their technology, though nowhere near the level of the Eternals, began to show potential. And despite the Eternals' dominance, something strange began to happen. Humans, driven by their relentless curiosity, started reaching for the stars. They built ships that could travel into space, explored their solar system, and began to understand the vastness of the universe. To the Eternals, this development was laughable. They dismissed Earth's progress as a fleeting moment in time, nothing more than the musings of an insignificant species. But what they didn't realize was that humanity was on the verge of something extraordinary. Humans, despite their many flaws, had one thing that the Eternals did not: a spirit of unrelenting resilience. As the centuries passed, Earth's technological advancements grew at an exponential rate. Humans had discovered new ways of harnessing energy, developed weapons that could break through the barriers of space itself, and built spacecraft capable of exploring other stars. Their curiosity was their greatest strength, and it would soon become their greatest weapon. The Eternals, in their arrogance, had ignored the small planet at the edge of the galaxy. They believed that no one, not even humans, could challenge their rule. They believed that their immortality and superiority were unassailable. They saw themselves as gods, and gods were never meant to be challenged. But then, one day, something unexpected happened. A small human warship, built with the advanced technology Earth had developed over the centuries, appeared in the Eternals' territory. It was nothing like the massive fleets the Eternals commanded, but it was enough to draw their attention. At first, the Eternals laughed at the sight of the tiny human vessel. They saw it as nothing more than an insignificant speck in the vastness of space, easily crushed under the weight of their power. Yet, as the human warship approached, the Eternals felt an unusual sensation, a flicker of something they had never experienced before: fear. They didn't understand it at first. Fear was a concept foreign to them. They were gods, after all. But this ship, this human vessel, wasn't like anything they had ever encountered. It was fast, precise, and unyielding in its approach. It was clear that the humans weren't here to beg for mercy or to surrender. They had come to fight. The Overlord, the leader of the Eternals, summoned his fleet to meet the human ship. He looked out at the stars, confident that this would be nothing more than a brief skirmish. The Eternals had wiped out entire civilizations in the blink of an eye. This human ship would be no different. They would crush it with ease, just as they had done to so many others. But the Overlord had underestimated humanity. The human warship, though small, had a power unlike anything the Eternals had seen. It was equipped with technology they couldn't comprehend, a technology that was far beyond their own. The human captain was no ordinary leader. They were fierce, determined, and willing to do whatever it took to protect Earth. As the two forces clashed, the Overlord realized something shocking. The human warship was winning. Each shot from the human ship seemed to strike with pinpoint accuracy, disabling one Eternal ship after another. The Eternals' once unstoppable fleet was faltering, unable to keep up with the speed and precision of the human vessel. The Overlord, watching in disbelief, realized that the universe he had ruled for eons was beginning to slip away from him. The humans had come, not as pawns, but as fierce warriors, and their ship was proving to be a force to be reckoned with. For the first time in their existence, the Eternals felt fear. The humans, the very species they had dismissed as insignificant, were threatening the very foundation of their rule. The illusion of godhood, once so firmly believed in, was beginning to crack, and as the human warship continued its assault, the Overlord understood the true meaning of their actions. They were not just fighting for survival. They were fighting for something far greater. The humans had shattered the illusion that the Eternals were gods, and now humanity was showing them just how powerful they could be. The challenge. The moment the human warship engaged the Eternals' fleet, the Overlord realized something had gone terribly wrong. The arrogance that had defined the Eternals for millennia began to unravel. They had assumed that the human warship, despite its advanced technology, would be nothing more than an easy target. Yet here it was, outmaneuvering them at every turn. Striking with devastating precision, the human ship, small but fast, darted through the battle like a deadly predator. Its weapons fired with deadly accuracy, striking down one Eternal vessel after another. The Eternals, who had never faced a challenge like this, were beginning to panic. They had dealt with entire civilizations before, but nothing had prepared them for the sheer determination and skill of humanity. Every attempt to retaliate was met with swift and calculated counterattacks from the human warship. Inside the Overlord's flagship, the mood had shifted from confidence to unease. His generals, once certain of victory, were now starting to question their own strength. "The ship is evading us," one of his top commanders said, frustration evident in his voice. "We can't catch it, and each strike we make only seems to make it stronger." The Overlord stood, his once proud demeanor faltering. He had always believed that the Eternals were invincible. Their technology, their immortality, had made them gods in their eyes. But now, for the first time in his life, the Overlord was questioning that very belief. This tiny human warship was proving to be an enemy unlike any they had faced before. It wasn't just about weapons or technology, it was about the spirit of humanity. As the battle raged on, the Overlord grew desperate. "Call in the reinforcements," he ordered. "Send everything we have. This human ship must be destroyed." But no matter how many ships the Overlord sent, the human warship continued to outmaneuver them. It wasn't just about firepower, it was about strategy. The humans had thought of everything, countering every move the Eternals made. The Eternals, in their arrogance, had never expected to face a force that was both intelligent and relentless. The warship was proving that humanity was not to be underestimated. In the heart of the human warship, Captain Jonas Matthews stood at the command console, his eyes locked onto the battle unfolding before him. He had always known that humanity had something unique to offer the galaxy, but even he had been surprised by the speed and precision of their ship. It wasn't just the technology that was impressive, it was the resolve of every human aboard that made the ship a force to be reckoned with. "We've taken out 3 more ships, Captain," his tactical officer reported. "The Eternals are retreating to their flagship." Matthews nodded, but his face remained grim. "We can't let them escape. If they regroup, they'll be back in full force. We finish this now." He turned to his crew. "Prepare to engage their flagship. This ends today." The crew moved quickly, following his orders without question. They had come to trust Matthew's judgment, and they were prepared to fight to the last. But even as the warship closed in on the Eternals' flagship, Matthews couldn't shake the feeling that they were facing something much bigger than just a military conflict. This battle was about more than just winning, it was about proving that humanity could stand against the gods themselves. Meanwhile, the Overlord was watching from his flagship, his face a mask of frustration. The battle had turned against him, and he knew that this human warship wasn't just a threat, it was a symbol that the Eternals were no longer untouchable. For the first time in their long existence, they were facing an enemy they could not control. "You've made a grave mistake," the Overlord muttered under his breath. "No one defies the Eternals." As Matthew's warship closed in, the Overlord's flagship began to activate its final weapon of unimaginable power, one that could destroy entire fleets in a single blow. The Overlord was prepared to go down fighting, to remind the humans why the Eternals had ruled for so long. But Matthews wasn't about to let that happen. He had a plan, and for the first time in his life, he felt the weight of the responsibility that humanity had placed on him. He was leading the charge against a godlike force, and if he failed, Earth would fall. "Activate the main cannon," Matthews ordered, his voice calm despite the intensity of the moment. "Target their flagship." The human warship's weapons powered up, the energy crackling as it aimed its sights on the Overlord's flagship. The Eternals had thought their godhood was unassailable. They had thought that no one could ever challenge them. But now, as the human warship unleashed its full power, they would learn just how wrong they were. The battle reached its climax as the human warship fired, its energy beams slicing through space with blinding intensity. The Overlord's flagship, once thought invincible, was struck with the full force of humanity's power. In a split second, the flagship exploded, its massive form disintegrating into space. The Overlord's voice, filled with disbelief and fury, echoed across the ship. "No, this cannot be." But it was too late. The Eternals had lost. The humans had proven that they were no longer just pawns in the galaxy. They were a force to be reckoned with. The fall of the gods as the remnants of the once proud fleet floated helplessly in space. The truth began to sink in. The Eternals, beings who had ruled the galaxy for centuries, were now facing the unimaginable, their fall from the throne. The human warship, though smaller and less advanced than the Eternals' Grand Armada, had decimated their forces with cold efficiency. The Overlord's flagship lay in ruins, a pile of shattered debris lost in the blackness of space. But it wasn't just the destruction of the Overlord's fleet that sent shockwaves through the galaxy. It was the profound realization that the Eternals were not the gods they once believed themselves to be. No matter how powerful they had been, no matter how many civilizations had bowed to them, they had now been defeated by a single human warship. The Eternals were no longer the uncontested rulers of the stars. They were just another defeated empire. Inside the human warship, Captain Jonas Matthews stood at the command console, watching the aftermath of the battle unfold on the display screens. His hands were steady, but the weight of what had just occurred pressed heavily on his chest. This was the victory they had fought for, but it felt bittersweet. They had destroyed an entire fleet, but they had also made enemies of the most powerful beings in the galaxy. There would be no peace after this, only consequences. We've done it, Lieutenant Davis said, his voice filled with disbelief as he looked up from his terminal. The Eternals are finished. Their flagship is destroyed. We've won, but at what cost? Matthews replied, his gaze fixed on the image of the shattered fleet. We may have defeated them, but their empire stretches far and wide. They won't let this go easily. And there are others out there who may take their place. The realization hung in the air like a heavy fog. The Eternals may have been defeated, but the galaxy was still a dangerous place, filled with forces beyond humanity's control. This victory, while monumental, had only scratched the surface of a much larger conflict. The war was far from over. As Matthews pondered the implications of their victory, a message came through on the warship's communications system. It was from the Galactic Council, the group that had once been forced to bow to the rule. Now, they were reaching out to humanity. Captain Matthews, this is Counselor Eriks from the Galactic Council, the message began. The Eternals' defeat has sent shockwaves through the galaxy. We are aware of your actions, and we must warn you. There are forces out here far more dangerous than the Eternals. Your victory may have made you a target, and we advise you to prepare for the consequences. The message cut off before Matthews could respond, but it left him with more questions than answers. The Eternals had been just one force in the galaxy war. Other threats lay beyond the horizon. And more importantly, how would humanity, now thrust into the galactic spotlight, handle the dangers that awaited them? We need to contact Earth, Matthews said, his voice full of resolve. The galaxy is no longer the same place it was before. Humanity is no longer just a bystander in the cosmic game. We are players now, and we need to prepare for what comes next. As the warship turned its course toward Earth, the crew felt a sense of both triumph and trepidation. They had faced an impossible enemy and emerged victorious, but now they stood at the precipice of a new reality. The fall of the Eternals had opened the door to a future full of uncertainty, and no one knew what lay beyond. The final confrontation as the human warship made its way back to Earth. A cloud of uncertainty hung over the crew. Their victory against the Eternals had shaken the galaxy, but their actions had not gone unnoticed. The Galactic Council's warning lingered in Captain Matthews' mind. There were other, far greater threats lurking in the universe. While the defeat of the Eternals marked a significant turning point, humanity was now at the center of a cosmic power struggle. Weeks had passed since the battle, and Earth had begun to regroup, processing the implications of the warship's victory. Earth's military forces had made their plans, but none of them were prepared for the true consequences of the war. The galaxy was a much more dangerous place than humanity had ever realized, and the Eternals' defeat had created a power vacuum that others were eager to fill. Captain Matthews and his crew found themselves in a new kind of limbo. Though humanity had proven its strength, they knew it wasn't enough. The alien species across the stars had seen what Earth was capable of, and now they were watching. Earth was no longer a passive player in the galaxy, it was an active threat. And the humans aboard the warship were the ones to lead this new chapter for humanity. But they had no idea what they were truly facing. Then, one day, the sensors aboard the Valar picked up something strange, an anomaly in space, unlike anything they had encountered before. It wasn't a ship, but the energy reading was immense, like a massive force gathering in the void. The ship's AI began to process the data, but Matthews knew something was wrong. He gathered the crew in the command center. "Everyone, listen up," he said, his voice low but filled with intensity. "We've detected something big out there. It's not a fleet, but it's enormous, and I don't think we'll be able to ignore it." Lieutenant Davis quickly analyzed the readings on his console. "Sir, the energy signature is unlike anything we've seen before. It's as if it's pulling power from the fabric of space itself. Whatever it is, it's coming straight toward us." Matthews nodded grimly. "This is it. We've been waiting for something like this, and now it's here. Prepare for the worst. We don't know if this is a friend or a foe, but whatever it is, we need to be ready." The crew went to action, preparing the warship for a potential battle. The feeling of unease grew as the anomaly grew larger on their sensors. It wasn't moving like a fleet, it was moving like something alive. Matthew's heart raced, but he kept his mind focused. His crew needed him, and they were about to face a threat far greater than they had ever imagined. The human warship, Valar, stood alone in space, its sleek metal frame casting a long shadow. The stars surrounding them seemed distant now, and all they could see was the massive energy disturbance ahead. The anomaly's presence was overwhelming, its energy signature massive and powerful, almost suffocating. Then, without warning, the energy abruptly intensified. A burst of light erupted from the heart of the anomaly, and the crew gasped as a colossal figure slowly materialized before them. It wasn't a ship, or at least not in the traditional sense. It was a massive entity, its form shifting and morphing with each passing second, as if it were made from the very fabric of space itself. "I've never seen anything like this," Lieutenant Monroe said, her voice full of awe. "It's like a living entity." The figure loomed before them, its size incomprehensible. As it approached, the Valar sensors went haywire. Communications with Earth were cut off. The anomaly's presence seemed to warp reality itself, distorting everything in its path. It was as if the universe itself was bending to its will. Captain Matthews gripped the console, his mind racing. What was this being? Had they just opened the door to an even greater threat than the Eternals? He had faced the gods of the galaxy, but this was something entirely different. As the entity came closer, its shape finally stabilized. It was humanoid in appearance, but its body radiated a strange energy that made it impossible to comprehend fully. It was the size of a moon, and its form shimmered with otherworldly light. It was not a god, not an invader, was something older, something beyond the understanding of any species. A being that could bend space and time to its will, without a word. The entity extended a tendril of energy toward the Valar, and the ship's systems flared to life as if under the command of this unknown force. It wasn't an attack, it was something much more subtle. The warship seemed to be feeding on the energy of the Valar, draining it slowly but surely. Matthews felt a sudden chill. They were powerless to stop it. We have to fight back. Davis shouted, panic creeping into his voice. It's draining our power. If we don't do something, we're finished. Matthews stood up, his mind racing. He had faced challenges before, but this was something beyond his understanding. The entity before them wasn't just an opponent. It was a force of nature, and its power was unfathomable. Keep firing the main weapon, Matthews commanded, his voice steady. Whatever this thing is, we can't let it take control. The crew scrambled to respond, but each shot from the Valar seemed to have no effect. The energy around the entity absorbed every blast, growing stronger with each failed attempt to strike it down. The Valar's weapon systems were being overwhelmed, and it was becoming clear they were facing something no human technology could defeat. The entity's voice rang out through the warship's speakers low, deep, and full of ancient wisdom. You have awakened something far older than the gods you once challenged were nothing compared to me. You have made your choice. Now you will learn the cost of your defiance. The crew of the Valar stared in horror as the entity's true power began to unfold before them. Humanity had just entered a new chapter of the galactic struggle, one that they may not survive. As the entity's power enveloped the warship, Matthews knew that the fate of Earth was about to be decided. The battle was far from over, and it was not just about defeating this new godlike force, it was about survival. For the first time, Matthews realized that humanity's place in the galaxy was on the line. And this time, they weren't just fighting gods, they were fighting the very fabric of the universe itself. A new dawn for humanity's presence was unlike anything the crew of the Valar had ever experienced. It wasn't just a physical being. It seemed to exist in a realm beyond comprehension, a force that bent space and time to its will. Its massive form, shimmering and ever-changing, loomed over the Valar, draining energy from the ship as if it were nothing more than a simple battery. For Captain Jonas Matthews and his crew, the situation was growing desperate. Every attempt to retaliate had failed. The entity's energy field absorbed their weapons, and the ship's systems were slowly being shut down. The once proud Valar was now nothing more than a helpless shell, drifting in the abyss of space. We can't hold out much longer, Lieutenant Davis said, his voice strained with fear. It's draining us too quickly. If we don't figure out a way to fight back, we'll be nothing but a pile of scrap. Matthews stood at the front of the command center, staring at the entity's energy field, enveloping the Valar. It was impossible to comprehend the magnitude of the being's power. The energy it was emitting seemed to warp the very fabric of space around it. The crew had no weapons that could penetrate the entity's defenses, no strategy that would work. But Matthews wasn't ready to give up. He couldn't. Earth's future depended on them. We're not out of options yet, he said, his voice calm, but his mind racing. This entity is powerful, but it hasn't killed us yet. There must be a way to turn the tables. He turned to his science officer, Dr. Emily Carter, who had been working tirelessly to understand the entity's energy field. She was the one who had noticed the fluctuations in the entity's energy signature earlier. Now, with the ship's power fading, she had one final theory. I think I've found something, Dr. Carter said, her voice trembling with both excitement and fear. The entity's energy field is incredibly advanced, but it's also unstable. It's pulling power from the very fabric of space itself, but it's not sustainable. If we can overload it, it might collapse in on itself. Matthew's eyes widened. How do we overload it? We need to focus the ship's remaining energy on one point right, where the entity's core energy is being drawn from, Dr. Carter explained. If we can push all the remaining power into that one spot, we might be able to disrupt the flow and destabilize its energy field. It's risky, and we don't have much time, but it's our best shot. Matthews didn't hesitate. He turned to his crew. Prepare everything we have. We're going to give it everything we've got. This is our last chance. The crew sprang into action, each member working with urgency as the Valor's energy drained away with every passing second. Matthews could feel the weight of the moment bearing down on him. If they failed, Earth would fall. They would never be able to stand up to a force this powerful. But he had no other choice. He was going to fight, no matter the cost. As the crew prepared to execute Dr. Carter's plan, the entity grew more aggressive. It began to send waves of energy, striking the Valar with increasing force. The ship's shields flickered and weakened. The ship groaned under the strain of the entity's power. But Matthews kept his focus. They had no room for failure. "We're ready, Captain," Davis said, his voice steady despite the chaos. "The energy's been rerouted. All systems are focused on the core." Matthews nodded. "On my command, fire everything." The Valar's weapons charged once again, this time with all the remaining energy the ship had. The hum of the ship's power core was deafening. Matthews held his breath, waiting for the perfect moment. The energy pulse from the entity's core grew stronger, as if it was sensing the threat. The ship trembled as if the very stars were shaking now. Matthews shouted. The Valar unleashed everything it had. A massive beam of concentrated energy shot from the ship's core, striking the entity directly at its source. The entity let out an unnatural, almost guttural sound as the energy collided with it. The being's form flickered and distorted. For a brief moment, Matthews thought the ship was about to be destroyed, but then there was silence. The energy pulse from the entity's core faltered, and its form began to destabilize. The massive being, once so powerful, began to break apart, disintegrating into raw energy. The Valar shook violently, but the crew held their ground. The entity's power was crumbling, and the Valar was the force that had shattered it. Then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the entity was gone. The crew stood in stunned silence as the energy field dissipated, leaving only the empty vacuum of space. The Valar floated in the void, its systems barely functioning, but alive. They had done it. Against all odds, humanity had overcome the impossible. Matthews let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. "We did it," he whispered, more to himself than anyone else. But the victory was bittersweet. The galaxy had just seen the true power of humanity. They had defeated a force beyond imagination, but in doing so, they had become the center of attention. The alien races across the universe would no longer ignore Earth. Humanity was no longer just a species struggling for survival. It was a force to be reckoned with. The Valar limped back toward Earth, the crew exhausted but victorious. As they returned home, Matthews knew that their journey was far from over. Earth had just taken its first steps into a new era, one filled with both hope and danger. The balance of power in the galaxy had shifted, and humanity was no longer a passive player. They had proven that, even against gods, humanity would rise. But the question remained, what would the galaxy do now that Earth had shown its strength?